Welcome to Pokemon Cuisine, Tasty, Taboo, or Toxic, a fun little series that I'm making to decide which Pokemon are delicious, downright bad for your health, or probably legal to eat. But I know what you're thinking. Aren't all of them kind of edible, though? While some technically yes, but that's on that's on you to decide if you want to die on that hill. If you want to be known as the guy who eats Rattatas. But what actually makes a Pokemon edible versus inedible? I'd say that a first good criteria is to decide how widely available is this Pokemon. Would this Pokemon be in high demand and be easily found in farmers markets, grocery stores, or restaurants? Or would they only be eaten in survival situations while you're traveling, if you can eat the Pokemon at all? Which leads to my second point. Would consuming this Pokemon give you any ill side effects? I'd say they count as the usual status effects. Things like paralyze, poison, burning, freezing, even things like confusion. Things like this I would consider hazardous to your health and not really good for just normal consumption. And lastly, I think the third consideration that we need to do is the availability of the species. A Pokemon that would not be good for consumption would be a Pokemon that would be considered endangered or a protected class. The endangered Pokemon would be Pokemon that you can normally only find in places like safari zones, or in nature preserves or parks. And it's safe to presume that most Pokemon that exude human-like qualities are considered a protected class and they're not, on the market for edibility. Because if you're trying to eat something that looks and acts like a human, that's kind of weird and on you. I'd say that's something that you need to see somebody about. This also kind of extends to Pokemon that are only seen as pets, though through not so much a protected agency like bird law, but more of a cultural thing. Because trying to eat a pet is kind of messed up, it's part of your family. It'll be trying to eat like a pet, like a dog or a cat or a rabbit. While in some areas that's okay, in others culturally it isn't. And for the sake of ease of this video, I'll be using a very Western mindset, which usually does imply that most pets aren't to be eaten. For this series, I'll be going through by national dex with some exceptions. In the case of pre-evolutions, or later added on post-evolutions, for Pokemon such as Pichu or Crobat, I will be including them with their appropriate Pokemon lines. The first 9 Pokemon in the National Dex are a pretty easy read. They are the Kanto starters, and due to the nature of their scarcity, as they're only found in nature preserves in Paldea, or as gift Pokemon by professors, I'd say that they're an endangered class of Pokemon, and it's probably illegal to eat them. Which, honestly, probably for the better, considering the toxins in the Venasaur line, which can cause respiratory health problems, and even Pokemon in the Blastoise lines, especially Wartortle, are often seen as symbols of longevity, so it's highly likely that it's culturally frowned upon to hurt or even eat these Pokemon. And so I'd say through its scarcity and culturally, it's taboo to eat these Pokemon. Next to talk about would be the Caterpie line, Caterpie, Metapod, and Butterfree. So the funny thing about this Pokemon that it's greatly expired off of the Eastern Swallowtail Caterpillar, and considering several of his Pokédexes say that it has a very bad smell, I'd say it's safe to assume that these Pokemon are toxic due to the diet of toxic leaves that it eats to ward off predators, and through its evolutions, it's only becoming more toxic through it just condensing down. And interesting enough, Butterfree actually weaponizes this toxicity. After evolving, it forms a dust-like substance on its wings, and by flapping its wings, it scatters it to immobilize and poison its prey. So I'd say this Pokemon line is actually pretty toxic to eat. But interesting enough, Caterpie's counterpart Weedle and its evolutions might actually be pretty edible, and it all comes down to the fact that its method of poison comes down to a sort of poisonous gland and a stinger, which once removed make the Pokemon actually pretty harmless to eat. Now, taste-wise, I'd say that its diet would be of other smaller Pokemon and leaves. So I would say that it would not be very tasty. But in a traveling situation, I can see somebody just taking off the little stingers and eating it. Honestly, I could say the same goes for Kakuna and Beedrill, though it's up to you if you want to fight and kill a Beedrill. Due to their aggressive nature, it's probably best to leave them alone. Which, unlike our next batch of Pokemon, would be the Pidgey line. I'd say these Pokemon are actually quite edible. Although based off of a Spearow, they're quite the same size as a chicken, and because of their nature, they're actually quite passive. So I can see them being farmed for food, like chickens for meat or eggs. Its evolution form, Pidgeotto, I'd say it's still kind of edible, it's a lot more aggressive, and its prey-heavy diet will affect the taste. I can more so see Pokemon farmers use Pidgeotto as guard Pokemon to protect their flock of Pidgeys. As for its final evolution, Pidgeot, I would say no, it has a larger prey diet, it's a lot more aggressive, but I can see it as a Pokemon often valued by trainers or bird enthusiasts. So unfortunately, I think it's only going to be deep-fried Pidgeys instead of deep-fried Pidgeots. The next group of Pokemon would be Rattata and Radicate. And honestly, I don't know. No, I wouldn't say so. They're often considered pest Pokemon, and considering they're often seen in the trash in more urban areas, I just wouldn't. I wouldn't want to be known as the guy who eats rats. You probably wouldn't want to be known as the person who eats rats. I mean, if I was in the middle of the woods, or in like the side of a mountain or something, and like, it's me, or the rat, I would eat the Rattata, you know, I would. But that's like starvation or survival. So overall, kind of, no, not really. I mean, technically yes, but not really no. Which kind of ties into the next two Pokemon, which would be Spearow and Fearow. They're birds like the Pidgey line, but they're a lot more aggressive, and they're considered pests to farmers instead. They also seem a lot more lean in their physiology, so they probably wouldn't be very good to eat since there's not a lot of fat on them. And like Rattata, I would only probably eat these, like in a survival situation. So like Rattata, technically yes, but no, not really. Another technically yes, but no, not really, would be Ekans and Arbok. So the thing about those is that, despite them being poisonous types, they have a venom sac in their mouths, so after being properly devenomed, I can see them being pretty edible. I'd say the only difference between those two Pokemon is the size. I'd say an Ekans would be more edible than an Arbok, merely because an Arbok is a lot larger and more aggressive, and would be harder to kill and hunt. So technically yes, I would say these are pretty edible, but they wouldn't be very common. Our last group of the episode would actually be the Pikachu line, starting off with Pichu actually. I'd say that Pikachu and Pichu are they're not considered food at all, they're more considered pets. They are pretty available in the wild, but because of their cute nature, they're just not considered food items. Especially for the evolution Raichu. That Pokemon, I can't see anyone really eating it. It's very friendly, and I can more so see it being a Pokemon you'd keep on the job, like inside of a power plant or like as an assistant to an electrician. Overall, the Pikachu line, no, they're just pets, they're little guys. And it would be pretty taboo to eat them, like culturally. Alright, I'd say this is a good chunk of the original 151, and I will call it here for today. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Poké Cuisine, Tasty, Taboo, or Toxic. Next week, we'll be continuing our journey through the first 151 in our little game of which Pokemon would be the most tasty.